Good call. Everyone knows what you're doing.
Thanks. I don't have any boogers, do I?
I wouldn't tell you if you did.
Thanks.
I feel like you guys are like yards away from me.
Yeah, we are very far apart.
We can grab a seat if you
wanna
like.
sit?
I thought about it, but then I don't have a microphone. Then we have to share a microphone. It just gets.
That's true.
You know, but we're friendly. If
We can-
somebody
we can
wants to
plug
take a
it
friendly
in.
Picture now is the time.
Now's
right?
the time, right?
How about that? I'll give the press an opportunity. How's that?
That's a good, yeah.
Thank you for coming.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
I appreciate it. Yeah. All right. So, if you guys have any questions, let me know.
Okay.
I can't see anything.
I know I can't see anything.
So when the questions are asked, are the individuals going to ask them, or is it going to be a
No, actually, they're gonna. So back there, there's some people with some cards. Those cards are being handed to my GA Joe.
Okay.
And Joe is going to text me the questions, so he's going to check them, and I'm going to check them, so we're going to make sure. Would you sit right there? I'll be telling you what the time limits are for each question, and then if you could give them oral, 1 minute or 30-second, depending. No, oral. Okay.
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 And if Jared gets out of line, stand up and hook him.
Yeah. Just start hollering.
It's fine. I'll take it.
That way I could take text from Joe. Hello, everybody. Welcome. We are 5 minutes behind schedule, which means that in political time we're early. So that's the good news. Thank you all for coming out. There's quite a few of you, and that's exciting. The good news is I can't see you, and the representatives can't see you either. So if you want to do something funky, have at it. Just what we do request is that you do it quietly and in your own zone. So my name is Dr. Elizabeth Dudash-Buskirk. It's very long. You can feel free to just call me Liz. I am currently the curator for Be Civil, Be Heard, which is a city initiative initially that needed to be taken over about a year ago, almost exactly a year ago. I'm celebrating my 1-year anniversary of working with Be Civil, Be Heard. And what I did was sort of, I think that the term at the CFO is blew it up to make Be Civil, Be Heard a little bit more active than it had been in the past. It used to be sort of passive, sort of our first 4 tenets say that we listen first and speak later. And that was sort of the attitude of Be Civil, Be Heard. And I'm starting to engage in something that we're calling radical aggressive civility. That sounds horrible. We need a new name. So sort of an idea that if we are civil to each other, we will be heard eventually. And that's the only way to really have a good discussion and a good civil civic discourse. I've been involved in politics in 5 different states for about 30 years in various different ways, from knocking on doors for local politicians to helping people analyze political messages. And currently my job is to help teach students how to critically analyze, create, and maintain political messages. Be Civil, Be Heard is sort of the love child of my life. It is the thing that distracts me from all of those things that bother me. It is the thing that I absolutely am passionate about. And tonight is one of the rare times where I get to put all of my worlds together, professor, parent, concerned citizen, curator of Be Civil, Be Heard. I cannot tell you in my 30 years how rare it is to have 2 current sitting government officials come together to have a conversation. I think those odds go down even more when those 2 are supposedly opposing each other. Jared Taylor a Republican from District 139. Do I have that right? Since they redistricted, it's been a little rough, Jared.
Yes.
Who is my state representative. If you're from Christian County, he has the western side of Christian County for the most part. Nixa is included in that. And Representative Crystal Quade from the 132nd, which, as most of us know, is from here in Greene County in Springfield. And they both very easily, and I found out there was a lot of back channeling going on behind my back, very easily came together and agreed to be here tonight. And then they agreed to talk about one of the most divisive topics ever, to talk about guns and restrictions and putting those two words together. And a lot of people get jumpy very, very quickly. Online, you might have seen civility go out the window pretty quickly. It didn't happen on the Be Civil, Be Heard page, but it happened some other places. And there were some comments that were made that I just simply ignored, and there are others that I engaged. The ones that I ignored, just let me say this. I don't know if it's the biggest compliment to me or the biggest criticism and insult to him, but whoever told me or asked why I have an Anderson Cooper haircut, I just want to say thank you, and sorry to Anderson. And if you're really curious as to why, it's not because I'm a flaming liberal from the Northeast who teaches in a university. And because I'm more masculine than I am feminine or anything like that, despite the attacks. It actually is because I'm on chemotherapy treatments, and when my hair falls out, it's a lot easier to take care of when it's short. Nobody's noticing my bald spots, are you? Told ya. Civility is not just about not calling people names. It's not just about not fighting. I tell people all the time, you could be civil and be angry. You could be civil and disagree. And tonight, what you're going to see is two people who are going to talk about things from an opposite side of an issue, opposing views of an issue that's important to all of us, and they're going to inform us about those sides. You have an opportunity to ask any questions that you like, but those questions must be written down and given to my lovely assistants and handsome assistants up there in the back, who will then text them to me, and I will ask them of the representatives. We agreed to this because, quite frankly, I like the sound of my own voice and I wanted the microphone. Finally, last but not least, if during the time of this this discussion, any interruption is heard, and I don't mean just by me, but by my civility certified compatriots up there, they will come to you and ask you to quiet down. And if it gets out of hand, because you guys look like partiers, then we will ask you to leave. I say that before every civility certified event, and never once have I asked anyone to leave. So let's not start it now, okay? I am very excited to introduce to you Representative Crystal Quade from the 132nd and Representative Jared Taylor from the 139th. Please give them a round of applause before we even begin. The questions are already rolling in, and we have a bunch of audience members coming in, and that's great. I'm very happy to see this. Before we get into too deep into policy, and as you two promised me you'd be boring. I'm sorry, Jared promised me he'd be boring. I don't know about you, Crystal. But before we begin, can you just spend a few minutes, each of you, and we'll start with Crystal. Just tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, why you do what you do, and why you decided to spend your time with us tonight.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you all for being here, and thank you for hosting. Welcome to the 132nd District. This is my district, and I'm very excited that Missouri State offered to host this. A little bit about me. I am from the area. I grew up in Webster County, which is Rogersville-Fordland region. Went to Missouri State University. I graduated here in 2008 with a social work degree. And a little bit about me. I'm a mom. I've got 3 kiddos, and youngest is 3. We've got a 12-year-old and a 13-year-old, or 14, excuse me, just turned 14. And I've spent my career in government and in the nonprofit sector. Before becoming elected, I worked for the local nonprofit called Care to Learn, which partners with school districts to provide funding for basic needs for kiddos. And prior to that, I worked for the United States Senate doing constituent services work. And when I was a student here at Missouri State, I went through the legislative internship program. And that's actually how I got involved in politics. I went as a social work student, was the first to get to go through that program as a social work student, and realized very quickly how much policy influenced helping people, which is what I wanted to do as a social worker. And so from then on, I've been interested in running for office, and when this seat opened, I jumped in. And why I'm here tonight, honestly, when I was asked to come tonight, it was a very easy yes for me. This, as has been said, is a very divisive conversation, but as someone who grew up in Webster County eating the meat that my father killed, I understand the importance of the Second Amendment rights, and then also we have a serious conversation that needs to happen in this country. We're seeing death rates rise, and I think that this type of forum where we can hear from you and we can get your input, but then also give our perspectives and have it in a civil format is definitely the best way to do this. The best way to legislate, in my opinion, is to hear what you all have to say, what my constituents want, and to create policy with that. So I'm really excited to be here. I'm excited to have the discussion with Representative Taylor, and thank you all for coming.
Thank you. And Representative Taylor.
Well, thank you. And first, let me start off by saying thank you to Liz and how easy it's been to work with you and for Be Civil, Be Heard and for putting this on, and along with Missouri State. And then each one of you for attending tonight. Like Representative Quade said, this isn't an issue that's easy. It's very divisive. We each have our own opinions on this topic, and we each want to be heard, and we want to make sure that our opinions are known, and we appreciate you coming out tonight. It's not an easy topic to discuss. It affects each one of us. And so a little bit about me. Again, my name is Jared Taylor from the 139th District, western half of Christian County. I have Nixa, Highlandville, Spokane, and Clever in my district, and decided to run for office 3 years ago, and haven't looked back since. It's been a fun ride. It's been interesting. There's a lot of topics that come up. You have to know about a lot of issues when you're in the House. My wife is at home with our 3 daughters. I have a 6-year-old, a 3-year-old who will be 4 in a couple weeks, and a 16-month-old, and we've got one on the way. And we find out what that'll be in December. So we're excited to find out if we're going to have a boy or a girl. But our house is pretty crazy, as you can imagine, with the girls running around and being crazy. But love every minute of it. I was in retail management prior to running for office. Worked in several different large businesses in loss prevention. And then, so my background, I was a criminal justice major at Hannibal LaGrange College in Hannibal, Missouri. Graduated from there and moved down to the Nixa area after that, and shortly thereafter was married. And I also worked in Congress, like Representative Quade. I was in constituent services, helped with different issues that individuals had with government. Individuals would call into the office, and I would be the one that would help try and solve those issues, whether it be IRS or Department of Labor or whatever. And it just got me, that's what got me into politics and what I really enjoy about it. The day-to-day grind sometimes is just that, it's a grind, but when you're able to help people and help in the constituent services part and get things done, cut the red tape that people deal with in the government, that's the rewarding part, in my opinion. And so that's a little bit about me.
Well, again, I can't thank you both enough for being here. I can't thank Missouri State University enough for supporting this venture that I chose to go on and just happened to work for them. Everybody's been so supportive, including the community. In your hands tonight, you have a bookmark, a very important bookmark that tells you the 10 tenets of civility. Representatives have agreed to these 10 tenets. Everybody who walks into the building or into this room tonight has agreed to these 10 tenets of civility, and everybody's going to be practicing them tonight. And if you want to learn more about Be Civil, Be Heard and what we can offer you, the community, feel free to go to www.becivilbeheard.org. It's actually on the bookmark as well, and we respond as quickly as we can It's also a place for you all to blog when you have concerns or questions or things you want to talk about that you don't feel you have a forum to talk about them in. Tonight, we have 5 questions that the representatives have agreed to. I'm so used to doing debates, I've called you guys candidates 5 times tonight. They're actually elected, believe it or not. And I have 5 questions we've agreed to that we're going to start off with, and then I'm going to move to the audience questions, which I already have so many, I'm not sure how I'm going to get through them all, but I will try my best. The first question that we're going to start with is actually going to go to Representative, you said just call you Representative Jared. Representative Jared.
You don't even need to see representative.
Just Jared?
Yeah.
You sure?
Yeah.
It feels wrong. Jared and Crystal, what legislation, and you'll have about 5 minutes to answer if you need it, what legislation do we expect to see proposed in the coming session?
So as it relates to the Second Amendment, I plan on filing similar legislation that I filed last year. It was House Bill 630, if you want to look up that legislation later on. It addresses gun-free zones in general. Right now in the state of Missouri, there are 17 listed locations where you cannot carry a firearm. A lot of those are private property. Some of them are public property. And so what this legislation would do is it would address some of those issues, or some of those areas. Some of those areas include churches, bars, daycares. Some of them include juvenile justice detention centers, prisons. They also include college campuses and elementary and secondary education. So just kind of give you an idea of where those 17 listed locations are. And mine addresses a few of those. So specifically churches, it's private property. In my opinion, we should leave it up to the private property owner to decide what they do on their private property. It shouldn't be up to the government to flat out say, no, you can't have a gun on this premise. If a private property owner, such as a church, wants to put up a sign that says, no, we don't allow guns in here, or choose the members in their congregation who they want, then I think it should be their decision. It should be up to the private property owner, not us as a government. Another one is a bar. Same thing. If you sell 51% of your sales as in alcohol, you are technically considered a bar. So there are locations downtown who might sell food and be a restaurant all day long, all week long, and then the college life weekends happen, and you sell 51% in alcohol. Well, now you're considered a bar, and it's listed in Missouri statute that you can't carry into those locations. Another one is the college campus. Right now, you cannot carry a firearm onto a college campus. You can't carry it onto a public or private. It's listed in the statute, and so my bill would address that. It would allow CCW permit holders only to carry on a college campus, and it would allow the private property or private college to decide what happens. So Drury, for instance, they would decide how they run their operation. So if they wanted to allow it, then they could, or if they want to put up a sign, then they could also put up a sign. But it should be up to that private property owner. I think that pretty much answers my legislation specifically.
Great, thank you. And Representative Quade, you had told me that you were going to be listening very carefully to Representative Taylor, and so I don't know if you can answer this question, but what legislation have you seen or do you think will come forward?
I, at this point, I'm not intending to file any legislation around this issue, but I can tell you some of the things that I've seen from my side of the aisle that I anticipate to be submitted again next year. One of those is Representative Doug Beck has a bill that will prevent transfer of gun ownership for folks who are on the no-fly list, so the terrorist watch list. Representative Tracy McCreary has one dealing with domestic violence, so that if police officers come out to a domestic violence call, those guns would be removed from the home for a short period of time to kind of take the danger out of that situation. And then I know Representative Peter Meredith is going to file some legislation to undo some of the previous laws that have passed, the permit, having the permits come back for CCWs and mandating the training, I know is one of those. So I know that there's several others, but those are definitely the top ones that I've heard are going to come back this year.
Thank you both. Let's take about 2 minutes on this because I think that you started to answer it. How much autonomy do different schools, different levels of schools perhaps, have to regulate firearms on their campuses currently? Crystal, we'll start with you.
Yeah. Missouri is interesting in this, and this is something I had to do a little bit of research on, to be honest with you. So our K through 12 schools, it is up to the individual governing board for what happens for the overall district. So if Springfield Public Schools decided to mandate guns in the classroom or to allow them in certain buildings, the board itself can make that decision. It does have to be a public hearing, however. We've seen in the past that they weren't public, and some of our school districts have gotten into some trouble with that. But then what's interesting about the K through 12 situation is individual building principals can make decisions for their building itself. So the district capacity is different than the individual building capacity, I don't know that we've had a lot of schools really challenge that or try to make changes, but that's how the K through 12 is set up. And then, and Jared, please chime in because he'll probably know a lot more about this than I will. And then on the campus level, my understanding is that they are considered gun-free zones, and so that you cannot carry on public campuses for universities.
Yeah, so, she's right. So on elementary, secondary education, the individual governing bodies can decide if they want to allow a single teacher, and they can also set up parameters, so they have to meet certain requirements. They have to go through certain training, and a lot of times those are set up through the sheriff's department of the local school. And we have a few in the state of Missouri who take advantage of that and allow their faculty and staff to carry on their grounds. A lot of rural schools do that. They can't afford a school resource officer, and the response time by law enforcement is 15 to 30 minutes at best. And so there's a little autonomy there. And as far as higher ed, so it's a little bit different. The governing body, the Board of Curators or whoever, the Board of Trustees, has a little bit of leeway, and they can actually allow campus concealed carry on campus. None of them do in the state of Missouri. And same thing with private property. The private colleges can also decide what they want to do now, but it is a listed location where you automatically can't, and then they have to enact rules on their campus to allow it. So, the Board of Trustees here can allow students or faculty and staff, and they can set up rules. So that's kind of how it works.
Okay. I think this is another short question, 2 minutes. Who do you believe should make decisions about school campus rules and regulations regarding firearms?
I think it depends on where we're talking about. If we're talking about private property, I believe it should be up to the private property owner, as I said earlier. It should be up to the campus, the individual campuses, and their board of trustees or curators. If we're talking about a public university, I believe it's up to the lawmakers. We have that authority, and that's what we're elected to do. We're elected to make those decisions. And Missourians overwhelmingly support the Second Amendment and the right to defend themselves if necessary. We saw in 2013, I believe it was Amendment 5, I'm sorry, it's 2014, and Amendment 5 passed 60% to 39% of changing the Constitution and protecting that as an unalienable right. And so that's, in my opinion, it should be, it's up to the lawmakers for the public universities.
Yeah, and this is one where we agree a little bit and disagree a little bit. So I definitely believe in the local control conversation of this, where the individual institutions decide what happens. In rural places, the K through 12 school might need somebody to carry a gun who's well trained, who knows what they're doing. And so I think it's just like anything with education. We should look to the local boards to decide what happens. And as Representative Taylor just said, when it comes to the universities, there is a pathway for them to allow guns on campus if they so wanted to. And I think that we should keep it that way. I don't think that lawmakers should come in and tell folks what to do from a top-down approach. I think that we should go to the folks who are the experts of the region and know what's best for their individual universities.
So forums like this are not common, and nor does everybody get to have a voice. We'll start with you, Crystal. What ways are the most effective for citizens to let their opinions known? And again, we'll just take about 2 minutes for each of these.
This is definitely my favorite question everywhere I go. In my opinion, the most influential thing you can do as a citizen to engage your legislators is to come to Jefferson City and testify in committee. So obviously, our bills first go to committee, and they have to be voted out before they go to the floor for the full debate. The most change that I've seen happen on legislation is when folks come and testify, share their stories and their expertise around legislation, and we can make amendments in committee. And the most change or stopping of things or adding of things that I've seen has been in the committee structure. Now, that said, of course, phone calls, emails, letters, all of those are effective. And then, our session normally, when we don't have a bunch of specials, is over in May. And so we are here May through the end of the year. And this is time that you should capitalize and invite us to coffee. Ask us to sit down with you. I sit down with folks several times a week to talk about specific issues and ask us to do that. As your elected officials, we should be accessible to you. So my first response is committees are definitely the most influential places that you can be, but then just ask us to sit down and talk about things.
Yeah, and I would echo that. I mean, committees definitely is a great avenue, but I would also say that just individual meetings. Whenever I receive an email, I try to respond personally to every email that I get. Now, I'll get 30 emails of the exact same email that's a canned email, and I'll usually send a canned response. I'll respond personally to the first one, and I'll copy and paste and send it to the rest of them because it's the same answer. But if you send me a personal email, I'm going to send you a personal response. It's not my legislative assistant. It's not somebody else in my office. It's me. And I think it's important that I send that response so that way you know where I am on the issue, even though we may disagree. And I don't mind a back and forth debate. But I would also say in district, I would agree with that. It's always good to sit down and talk to people face to face and know where they're at on the issue. It's a lot easier than going back and forth on email. And then I would also, I've lost my train of thought, but yeah, I think that pretty much answers it. But
Well, and I was just about to say that as one of your constituents, you have always answered my emails, but I've only sent you 2 over a year. So they were very personal. Thank you for that. So what would you two, and we'll start with Jared. This is the last of the 5 canned prepped questions we have tonight. What would you, as representatives of them, like to know from your constituents?
Well, I think it kind of goes along with what I just said is I like hearing from my constituents. I have Moms Demand Action in my office, and I also have Missouri Firearms Coalition. You probably can't get 2 more extreme groups in the office at different times, but being able to hear from people on both sides of an issue, I think, is very important. And so the more interaction that I can have with my constituents, and this is one of those ways, I think the better. And so it helps me be more informed. I think one thing that I forgot was a phone call. We get numerous phone calls every week. My assistant usually answers those, but if there's an issue that comes up, again, I try to call people back if they need a call back. But just being in contact with your representative, let them know who you are and where you're at on issues, I think is the best way.
Yeah, I would definitely echo that. We had over 2,000 bills filed last legislative session, and there's no way that any one of us can be an expert on everything that comes across our desk. So we really need to hear from you to let us know what you want. I sent out surveys from my office, and I received a couple hundred back, but I represent 37,000 people, and I had about 250 come back to me. And so, we knock doors and we talk to folks, but we also need you to reach out to us to let us know your thoughts on things, particularly about tonight. And I know that we've already submitted questions, but in my district, I have Missouri State University, Drury, Evangel, and OTC. And so one thing that I'm hoping to learn tonight is more about specifically the campus carry and what you all, particularly the students who walked in, your thoughts on that issue, and of course faculty and staff too, to hear how, because that's going to directly affect you in this room. So in terms of tonight, that's what I'm eager to hear about.
Well, we have a lot of questions. Some of them, it's seeming, I'm not really sure that they're repeats necessarily. I think they're points of clarification. So for the most part, I think that's sort of where we're going to be. what specific regulation or regulations would be effective in stopping gun violence if there was such a thing? And let's give this about 4 minutes. Crystal, let's start with you.
Okay, that is a very broad question.
Yes, it is.
So I am definitely a believer in that issues such as violence stem from more of a cultural problem. When you look at things like poverty and drug use, and violence goes hand in hand with those situations. And so I think when you're looking at the big picture conversation of how we make America safer, I would like to see more investment in prevention and resources for people. So that's a very broad answer, and I imagine that folks are asking specifically about guns, so I'll mention that too. I definitely am a firm believer in background checks, but more specifically training. I grew up around firearms. We had loaded guns on the wall, and I know how to shoot, but I also know what it means when you don't know how to shoot. And I think that if we're going to have folks carrying guns around, which is definitely their right and the way the current law stands, I would like to see people trained so that folks know what they're doing, and if there was an instance that someone needed to use a gun in self-defense, that they would actually know what they're doing and not cause more harm than what they're trying to do.
Thank you. Jared?
Well, I would say that there is no regulation that's going to stop an evil person from doing something evil. Criminals are criminals because they are not following the laws. So enacting new laws is not going to stop someone who already is not obeying the law. I think it's a difficult question because I don't think there's any specific legislation that's going to stop someone bad from doing something bad.
Thank you, both. And I think this is another difficult, broad question, and Representative Taylor, we'll start with you. And it's a question I'm concerned about. How do we keep gun safety in the national conversation?
Well, I think that that's up to each individual person. When you decide to purchase a firearm, I think that's up to you to make sure that your gun is safely stored. And individual responsibility plays a role in this. And we've got to make sure that there are conversations about gun safety. The Department of Conservation requires a hunting certification and before you can get your hunting license as a teen. I think those are good areas, to continue that discussion. I went through it. My girls are going to go through it. But it also starts at home. It starts with me teaching my girls, and I already do this now because I'm not always going to be there when they're at someone else's house. I'm already having this conversation even with my 3-year-old who doesn't really understand completely. But it starts with individuals in the home, and I think as much grief as they get, but the NRA does a great job of talking about gun safety and having those conversations, and that's where I think it starts, is in the home.
I definitely agree that it starts in the home. If you're going to be a family that has guns, you need to have that conversation with your kiddos. It was a conversation I had every day growing up. But to keep it in the national spotlight, I think, one, unfortunately, it is going to stay in the national spotlight because we're seeing these large shootings happen more frequently, or I say more frequently very loosely. I don't have the data to say that, but we're seeing it happen over and over again. But I think, for me, I believe that we should be having those conversations as they're happening. There's a lot of dialogue online about don't politicize these terrible situations, and I agree we shouldn't. But I also believe that there is no better time to talk about something than when it's happening, so it's fresh on our minds, and so we can have an actual conversation about it. When we have a natural disaster happen, we're going to talk about how effective the government is on coming in and bringing resources to those people as it's happening, and then we also will review it after the fact. And I believe that when it comes to gun safety, we should be doing the same thing. We should be having the conversation all the time so that we can come up with good solutions.
We'll go back to Crystal first on this, and it's sort of a two-parter, I think, but what is the point of waiting periods or background checks for gun sellers when private sales don't require those, or why isn't that particular issue being addressed by legislation?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I feel like that's a kind of a hypocritical law, honestly. I do believe that the delay, I don't see any problem with having a delay if we were to have one. We put delays on a whole lot of things, women's health care, for instance. If you want to get a prescription drug that's covered, that's not covered under Medicaid initially, and you have to get a pre-authorization, there's a waiting period for that. If we're going to have adequate background checks where we're looking at all the various things that we need to be looking at, the delay, I don't see a problem in that. Now, when we have a delay versus the private sales, I am someone who supports having the private sales also do background checks and looking into that and expanding that type of policy. But I think whoever asked that question brings up a good point. Why do we have this situation where one has regulations and the other doesn't? And I think it's worth a conversation.
Mr. Taylor?
So the waiting period, again, I'm going to go back to is what you're doing is you're stopping a lawful person from purchasing a firearm. You're not stopping a criminal. I mean, we've seen multiple times the last couple, and I could tell you the exact ones, but where the shooter in these situations passed a background check. So having another background check isn't going to do any good. We're talking about lawful gun owners having to wait, to possibly defend themselves. I respectfully, would disagree with Representative Quade on that issue. The waiting period, I don't think is appropriate, and I also would say that having a background check for a personal sale is unnecessary. You're talking about having a background check when we already have background checks that fail, but you're also talking about if I want to give a gun to one of my girls when they get older, having to have them background checked and going through that process, or being background checked every time that I want to have I purchase it from a friend. We're talking about millions of sales, and it's unnecessary regulation. We're talking about people that are already lawful citizens who are obtaining these weapons. If they shouldn't have these weapons already anyway, then they're not going to go through a background check whether or not there's a law for it. Just because there's a law doesn't mean they're going to go to this background check.
Currently, going sort of along with these regulations, insurance costs are higher for dangerous drivers right now. We know that, as opposed to if you're a safe driver, that they're relatively low by comparison. Since gun violence often leads to higher health care costs, just like a bad driver, should the state of Missouri explore an insurance requirement similar to that, to what's required for driving? And Representative Taylor, I'll let you go first on this one.
No. We're talking, the Second Amendment is an unalienable right that it should not be infringed. And when we're talking about having a insurance for something, we're talking about being protected. And as a person who's going to defend myself if necessary, I shouldn't have to be paying a monthly premium in order to protect myself, which is already a constitutional right. So I don't exactly know how to answer that question without saying no.
Okay.
I honestly don't know how to answer that question either. I have not seen policy suggestions around insurance with gun carriers, and so I definitely don't want to speak ill-informed because I definitely don't know about insurance around guns. I think that it's a valid question when we're talking about the healthcare costs and how that all plays out depending on I've seen, let me back up. So I've seen things of limiting the sale of ammunition or putting parameters around if you were to then sell a gun, then you're liable, and those types of conversations. I think that's a conversation that we should be looking at. I think we should be looking at all these conversations, but just off the cuff in terms of an insurance, I don't know that I would support something like that unless I actually was able to read the policy, but I haven't seen anything about that.
Thank you. Does And I think that I'll go with Representative Taylor first. Jared, does the proposed legislation that you've talked about compel private establishments to allow guns in their establishments?
No, it doesn't compel them. They have the choice, just like they do now. Private property owners in the locations that aren't listed in statute already have the ability to do that. So let's say Walmart, for instance, they already have the ability to decide whether or not they do or don't want guns based on, they can put up the 11 by 13 sign at each of their entrances. That's the standard in Missouri. And so they can do that. It's their decision as a private property owner. They're not compelled to go one way or another. It's up to them. Now, I will add that there's language that Representative Nick Schroer has introduced that deals with the issue of insurance, actually, and puts compelling individuals who, businesses who decide to put up a sign that it would be their responsibility to provide safety for their patriots who frequent their store. I disagree with the language. I don't think that should be a requirement. I think, again, it should be up to the private property owner.
Yeah, so my first, I guess, rebuttal might be I don't know if that's the right word in this type of forum, but, if the current law is that folks have that choice, then I don't know why we would need to add new law and additional language to the statutes that currently exist, where if private properties want to do that, then they already can. So why would we need to do more than that? In terms of Representative Schroer's language, yeah, essentially what his bill would do is that if I'm a private property owner and I say that you cannot have guns in my business, and you come in and say my business gets robbed and you get injured, then I am then liable for what happens to you. And I agree with Representative Taylor that I don't agree with that language. I think that if a private owner says no guns are allowed, then you are taking that risk by walking in there, and so I don't support Representative Schroer's bill.
I apologize to whoever sent this question in. I'm going to read it just as you wrote it, because as a city slicker raised in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, I have no idea what this actually means. We'll start with Representative Taylor, because Crystal looks like, please, not me. It's not that scary. It's not a hard question, I don't think. It's just difficult for me to understand. The vast majority of farm pests, and I like food, so this is important, such as coyotes and feral hogs, are controlled by citizens with semi-automatic weapons. We have feral hogs here in Missouri.
Oh,
yes.
Yeah, it's very bad.
It's a very big problem.
I'm suddenly very frightened. Thought they all were in Arkansas, sorry. Preventing millions of dollars in damages from these animals. What would stop these farm pests from causing more damage if we did not have access to semi-automatic weapons? Did I ask that correctly? Okay.
So, I guess the answer is, if we didn't have access to them, then they would probably run more rampant and do a lot more damage. Feral hogs in the state of Missouri is a very big problem. It's becoming more and more of a problem as we go. But so yeah, if we didn't have access to semi-automatic or long guns, we would have an issue. We wouldn't be able to control them.
Yeah, so if you want to learn more about the feral hog problem in the state of Missouri, come to a budget hearing. We spent about 3 hours talking about feral hogs. I learned more than I ever thought I would know about feral hogs. But I think, that brings up a good point. The feral hog problem, as well as other pests in Missouri, is a huge issue. We spend a lot of taxpayer dollars trying to manage that in the Boot Heel and in other places throughout the state. So I think that's a valid point. But the dirty word that comes to mind when I'm thinking about this question is compromise. And I think that, maybe we could look at legislation around if you have a farm and this is, your number one sole business and how you pay your bills and feed your family, then we could look at parameters around assault weapons specifically for that purpose. I live in the city of Springfield. I live right by Drury University. I don't need an assault weapon to kill feral hogs. I don't need one. Now, in the boot heel, they do. They also need helicopters, and they need a whole lot of other things to kill these feral hogs. So I think that this is a conversation that we could find common ground on both sides and look into that more, because it is a huge taxpayer, situation that we need to be concerned of.
I will not be sleeping tonight. And thank you for that question. Representative Quade, do you believe that certain classes of firearms should be banned? And I followed up that feral hog question
Yes.
with that one.
That's
just the order it came in. I apologize.
This is, again, I am a Democrat, but I grew up in Webster County, and I understand the purpose of weapons. I do. And I think that this is a place where we could find that compromise. As I said, I don't believe that I need to have an assault weapon. I don't believe that I need access to magazines that can shoot guns at rapid rates. I have no purpose for that. Living in the city of Springfield, where I live, when there's no wildlife around. But on the other hand, if we're talking about feral hogs, which I've never come across one in my personal life, but I imagine it's very scary and you need access to something quickly. So I think that we could be looking at policy that finds that common ground, where we are really addressing the conversation of rapid fire weapons in public places where people are dying very quickly, but still also maintaining access where rural farmers need to control populations on their farms. And so that's not a very yes or no answer, which I'm sure is what you all wanted in this room, but this is not a black and white issue for anyone in this country, and so I think that that's something we should talk about.
Jared?
No.
Okay. I had a feeling that was going to be short for you. Okay. Currently, and I'm not sure which one of you wants to take this first. I think I'll go to Jared, because you're short tonight with your answers. Not sure. You know what I'm trying to say. See, you have a PhD in communication and you still screw up. Do currently in the House of Representatives, both of you, are concealed and carried weapons allowed?
Yes and no. So the Capitol is one of the listed locations in the state of Missouri in statute that you can't carry. However, there was some leeway that the governor allowed. So it's specific in the legislation where it says that you can't carry into a committee hearing room and you can't carry onto the House floor. But the governor, when he was elected, came into office, he put up signs that said you can't carry into these locations, but you can carry with a CCW everywhere else in the Capitol. So you can carry into the Capitol. Legislators are exempt from that rule. We are allowed to carry anywhere in the Capitol that we want. My legislation would address that, and it would allow CCW permit holders to carry anywhere in the Capitol, not just the areas not listed in statute.
Yeah, I mean, that's a factual question. That's how it is. We as legislators enter in through a different door than the general public does. So if you were at the Capitol last year and then came this year, you'll see the big difference is now there are limited doors that the general public can come into, and there are metal detectors that folks now have to walk through that they didn't before. Whereas legislators can just walk in through the basement door, and we don't go through those metal detectors. But what he said is accurate.
Okay. So, and I think that I'm doing this question correctly. I had another question I think is a good follow-up. If people are allowed to carry weapons in the Capitol, and Representative Quade, I'll go to you first, why shouldn't they also be allowed to carry on state universities if they've been through the training?
Well, I'll be honest with you, I don't feel comfortable with folks carrying in the Capitol building. It's a very heated, divisive place, and I will tell you that I have talked to many staff members who are there year-round when we are not, and they would like to see more parameters. We actually just had a debate on the metal detectors because the way the governor put them up, he didn't actually go through budget with the money, and so the questions were, how is he paying for this? And so we had a hearing about it, and I talked with many staff members in the building because we were discussing removing the metal detectors, and a lot of the staff members would like to see them stay, and they would like to see some additional protection protections because they're there all year, and feel like that building is a target, of course, because we are doing legislation there. And so I'll be honest with you, on the House floor, things get real heated. People yell, people are not always civil, and it is worrisome to know that there might be somebody who's not trained, who's carrying on that floor, who might be upset with me because I say something. That's a personal opinion and a personal fear that I have, but I know that when folks come into that building, you're taking that risk of being in a divisive place with differing opinions where people hopefully won't ever get out of hand.
Well, I mean, so here's what I would say is yes, that building has been a place where it's been heated discussion for years, and we're talking about law-abiding citizens who carry in that building, and not one time have we had an issue with them. And if there is an issue, if someone does pull their weapon, there are already laws against that. You can't just pull a gun just because you're mad at somebody. That's not how it works. And so while I understand the representative's position, I would respectfully disagree. And same thing on college campus. I do believe that individuals, we're talking about a government-owned property, citizens that pay for those buildings should have the ability and the right to defend themselves on those locations if they decide. And like she said earlier, if there's a sign that's up and they don't want to go into the private property, then that's their decision as well. That's their right. They can choose not to spend their money there, but that's up to the private property. As far as government, in my opinion, the citizens paid for it. It's a protected amendment, and they should be able to exercise that amendment on public property as well.
Okay, a good follow-up to that, and I'm putting these in a slightly different order just to be able to follow this up. There's a community college professor in here who asked, right now their college campus is a gun-free zone, and they prefer that it be gun-free, but if they wanted to consider what research is out there that suggests that having guns on college campuses or in places like the Capitol is beneficial, where would they find it? What would that research be, or what would it look like? And I don't know who wants to go first on this one.
Google.
Students, let's be careful with that one.
I don't know where specifically to send them to. There's a gentleman, John Lott. He has a lot of research out there and specific to data. He's a numbers guy, and his books are very interesting on the topic. It shows when we allow CCW, crime rates go lower. On college campus specifically, when we talk about 1 in 4 women are sexually assaulted by the time they graduate, allowing them to defend themselves when they're on campus, I think is important. And 25% of crimes go unreported on college campus, so that number could be a lot higher. And so I don't know if that answered the question or not, but.
One thing I've found, especially since being a legislator, is there's data for everything, and you can generally find data to support your theory. It's just which side has the most data, right? So talking about assault on campus, I mean, the data that I've found is most women who are assaulted on campus, it happens in an intimate situation with someone that they know. And so, if I'm on a date with my boyfriend, I'm probably not going to be ready to pull a gun on him because I trust him. And so the data shows that women who are assaulted tend to be assaulted more by people that they know and have great relationships with. So to talk about research, I mean, there's data across the board. One of the things that I have tried to do while looking into this specific issue is going to the trends that happen. And so you look at states who have passed laws, look at the violence trends that they've had, and vice versa, guns who have repealed regulations, or states who have repealed regulations, and to look at that. And you can usually find that on through government sites, but there's always going to be data on either side of the issue, and that's why it's really important, students, that you do a lot of research so that you are making sure that you're not getting, research that is influencing somebody's specific opinion.
And I think you just answered 3 questions I had on there about assault on campus. So thank you for solving that time problem. We still have about a half hour, which is great, because the questions are becoming more complicated, as I'm sure you can imagine. It seems that a lot of people are getting the sense that if you support, I'm trying to think of a good way to ask this very general question. I'll give you each 5 minutes to sort of ruminate. Allowing restrictions or allowing people, individuals, or the state to restrict gun rights or gun carry, any type, conceal or open carry, on state property or private property, is that the same thing as a violation of the Second Amendment of the United States Constitution? And Jared looks like he's about to burst. Crystal, are you willing to let him go first? Okay.
That's fine, go ahead.
Well, I don't know that I'm going to take 5 minutes, but yes is my answer.
This is why I invite Representative Taylor back
See,
anytime.
you said you were going to be long, and that we needed
No, I
to
said I
make
was
you
going to be
step-
boring. Yes, I mean, I believe that a restriction on the Second Amendment is a violation of that right, and not allowing a citizen to exercise that right wherever they may go is a violation of that right. The Supreme Court has upheld the Second Amendment being able to defend yourself and carry a concealed weapon numerous times. And so, yes, I think it's a violation of your right.
So I will say that the interpretation of the Second Amendment is different depending on who you ask, of course, and people break it down into the different segments of the amendment, and folks have different interpretations of what each one of those words mean. Since you don't have the opportunity to come back and follow up with this, I'll say, he just said that citizens should have the right to carry wherever they want. But we already put laws in place that say if you are a felon or if you have, et cetera, then you cannot carry. So we are already taking this amendment that's supposed to be free for everyone and paring it down with the interests of public safety. And so when it comes to this amendment, as well as everything else, I think we have to look at that. We have to look at public safety and what it means. I would imagine that most folks would not say that everyone should carry regardless of mental illness or regardless of federal crimes, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think that when we're having this conversation, we need to be thinking about public safety.
And actually, I'll give Representative Taylor the ability to come back, because I just got another question that sort of follows this up, which is, shouldn't the value placed on innocent lives that may get lost in a gunfight be more important than our thoughts about the Second Amendment?
Again, there are already laws in place where, if someone shoots another individual, that they're going to be charged with murder or negligent homicide or, whatever it might be. So there are already laws in place for that. But I can't remember what you said a minute ago that I was going to respond to.
Sorry, I apologize.
I know, I should have taken notes. The question was long.
I did give you a legal pad.
Yeah. Can you read the question again?
Yes, I can.
I'm sorry.
Of course, you said that, and I lost it. Okay. When considering the Second Amendment, shouldn't we consider the value of innocent lives that might be lost in a gunfight to be more important than a Second Amendment infringement?
So any lives lost, is an unfortunate, tragic situation. But again, there are already laws to make sure, if something like that were to happen, that they're going to be prosecuted. But I would also say that the statistics are extremely low where a innocent life taken by a CCW permit holder who's trying to stop another individual, whether they were hit or whether they died as a result, is extremely low. It's higher in law enforcement than it is for the average citizen. So I guess if we're going to use that example, are we going to put the same restrictions on law enforcement?
I would say that first, anytime we use the phrase more important when we're talking about public policy is dangerous. It's all open into personal interpretation of what is important. So I just wanted to say that with that question. But Now I'm going to ask for the repeating of the more important, Second Amendment more important than the lives lost independently.
Is the Second Amendment more important than people's lives? That's basically the question.
Yeah, so obviously people's lives are important. I will say that when it comes to what we're doing with public policy and creating laws as legislators, I am interested in always finding ways to do it better. And so if we are currently in a situation in our country where we are having, tons of elementary school children be killed in a mass shooting, and we're seeing mass shootings happening over and over again. Yes, we have current laws in place, and we have laws that law-abiding citizens sometimes follow, and criminals sometimes follow, sometimes don't. I don't want to get into those weeds of that conversation, but we should always be trying to do something better. So just like everything else we do as legislators, because there's currently laws, that to me doesn't mean we should stop. If we did, we wouldn't go to work anymore, right? So we are continuing to run for election, continuing to try to be legislators. We have a situation right now that is of concern. And I know that folks who still are very big supporters of the Second Amendment are concerned when children are killed in an elementary school. Everyone is, right? So I think that we should be continuing the conversation. And to me, it's not about what's more important. It's about doing our jobs as legislators and looking at public policy, doing things like this to try to come up with better solutions because people are dying.
Okay, thank you. Now, I'm going to read this question verbatim again, just to get it right. When the permit to purchase law was repealed in 2007, the national homicide rate increased by 34%, according to the Johns Hopkins Center for Gun Policy and Research. Does this correlation compel you to consider reinstating permit to purchase? And Crystal, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I support permit to purchase, so those statistics, of course, definitely, I think when it comes to this conversation, as I said from the very first question, we need to also be looking at larger public issues such as poverty and low wages and all of these other things that contribute to violence. Our mental health crisis that we have right now contributes to this conversation too, but I do support permit to purchase.
Jared?
Yeah, I mean, I don't support it, and the reason is, like I said earlier, what you're doing is you're forcing law-abiding citizens to wait on potentially being able to defend themselves if the need were to arise. Criminals aren't going to go through the permit to purchase requirement. I mean, they're already unlawful. They clapped, and I forgot my.
I've been letting people clap all night. Yeah. I've tried, and I'm not going to restrict that just because, First Amendment. So I'll let that go. Civility speaking. Civility speaking. So the next question is, if we allow guns on campuses and in schools, is the state of Missouri prepared, and I don't know how well you can answer this question, but is the state of Missouri prepared to find ways to fund mental health and other services for students who would then have more access to weapons?
I don't think they would have more access. They have the access just as much now as they would with campus carry. For instance, again, I'm going to throw out some numbers, they may be disagreed with, but a study showed that over the last 20 to 30 years, there have been some form of college, of carry on college campuses. And the idea has become a little bit more popular lately. It may have been one or two colleges, Colorado passed concealed carry on college campus about 10, 12 years ago now. But in that last 20 years, there have been a total of 150 colleges, 1,500 semesters during that time frame where those colleges have allowed CCW on campus. Of those 1,500, not a single act of violence or threat of violence or a suicide attempt by a single CCW permit holder on one of those college campuses. So there's not just one or two that might be an anomaly. We've had zero on any of those college campuses from a CCW permit holder. And the reason is because we've got law-abiding citizens who respect their right to carry and make sure that they protect their weapon and make sure that it's stored properly and make sure that they're safe with it. So not a single act of violence, threat of violence, or a suicide attempt by one of those CCW permit holders. So no, I don't think allowing CCW on campus is going to affect or going to allow individuals with mental disability to have better access than what they already do.
I mean, in short, to answer that question, no, obviously there's no funding in Missouri for a lot of things. Our budget is very much in the red, and so while I would like to see funding put to mental health, regardless of what comes out of Second Amendment policy, we need more funding for mental health services. But I would guess the point that whoever wrote that question, I'm going to make some assumptions here, but is around the conversation that college students tend to have higher suicide rates. There's high drinking rates, there's high, problematic conversations and situations that happen on campuses. And, I've read a lot of reports that one of the biggest pushbacks that people give to campus carry is that suicide rates are higher, mental health issues are higher for students, there's high level of stress, and then having access, regardless of being a CCW carrier or not, they are under higher levels of stress. And so that's a concern for folks if students are having guns on campus. But to answer the direct question, no, there wouldn't be any additional funding for anything like that.
Okay. Okay, if you have a question, if you would do me a favor, if you would go tell it to the people in the back so that they can send it on down to me. I've got one other question I've got to get to, and then we'll allow that to happen. But he's literally right there waiting for you, and he'll send it to me. Could you do that? Okay. So the next question that we have for you is actually a follow-up to the permit to purchase question. If criminals will simply break the law, why did the homicide rates increase when the repeal occurred? Or does that correlation not signify, does the correlation not signify that people were following the law?
Well, I think that's hard to say because I don't have the statistics in front of me. So, we could pull out any statistic from that, but in general, when states pass CCW laws, we see a decrease of 12% in violent crime rates. Those rates also include, I don't know, possibly, but suicide rates. They also include police officer shootings. They also include homicides are also included in self-defense cases. So maybe it was more self-defense because people were able to purchase weapons and be able to defend themselves. So it's hard to say, without knowing the statistics and without looking at it, in my hand, but there's a lot of things that go into homicide rates.
Yeah, I would definitely, agree. Without having that data in front of us, it's hard to say. But my response to that is when it comes to this conversation, I like to defer to law enforcement. And when we repealed a lot of these restrictions in the state of Missouri a couple years ago, before I was in the legislature, the Police Officers Association, as well as the campus security and all these various folks have testified, saying that the removal of the permit would become more dangerous for police officers when they are trying to perform their work. And when it comes to, if there was a crime happening and folks who have guns are pulling them out trying to defend, then the police officers don't know who the criminal is. And so when it came to that specific legislation, if you look at who testified against, it was law enforcement. And when it comes to this conversation, again, without having the data on specific homicides to know which and what have you, I like to defer to the experts, and our law enforcement are the folks that we celebrate and ask to protect us, and we should be listening to them when it comes to this too.
Okay. I'm going to start with Crystal on this one again. While gun safety should start at home, not everyone who can legally purchase a firearm has been raised in a home which discusses gun safety. So how can the Missouri House of Representatives ensure that gun owners have adequate training and education before carrying a gun in public?
Yeah. Well, if we're asking the legislature to do that, I think it's by the training, by mandating the training. I am fortunate that I grew up in a home that I know how to handle a weapon, but not everyone does. And especially when you were talking about all the different various cultures and things that we've talked about tonight, it is concerning that folks don't have to have a training to carry. I think the debate comes should the legislature be the ones responsible for doing that? And I think that's a different question. But what we can do as legislators is require that folks have training if they're going to be carrying a weapon, particularly in public places, that they know what they're doing.
Can you
Jared?
repeat the question?
Yes, I will, absolutely. While gun safety should start at home, as we've all talked about already, not everyone who can legally purchase a firearm has been raised in a house which discusses gun safety. So how can the Missouri House of Representatives ensure that gun owners have adequate training and education before carrying a gun in public?
I think that's an easy question. I don't think it's up to the Missouri House to decide. It's not government's responsibility to train individuals on gun safety. We can encourage, we can offer, give paths, we can talk about it ourselves in debates, but it's not government's responsibility to make sure that individuals are being safe. And in saying that, I actually grew up in a home that we didn't have guns. I didn't hunt as a kid. My dad didn't hunt, and so it was everything that I learned by myself. It's personal responsibility. Individuals need to take that if they're going to decide to have a gun, then that they need to take the responsibility of making sure that it's safe.
Okay, somebody asked, what does quote-unquote assault weapon mean? And I don't know, does the government have a specific answer to this, or? They're like, neither of us are answering that question, look up dictionary.com. That's what I just heard.
I'll answer it. Assault weapon is a that is not a description of a gun. An assault weapon, people think that a black gun that is this big is an assault weapon, no matter how it shoots or how many rounds it can hold, if it's black, or camo. That's the description of an assault weapon. Assault is an action. It's not the description of a gun.
Did you want to add to that?
Well, I don't know that I have much more to add. He knows much more about guns than I do. But my understanding, can I ask him a question? Can we do that?
I am totally fine with Representative Quade asking Is everybody else okay with that?
You good with that? AR-15 stands for what? Is that?
It's the, it's not assault rifle.
Okay.
It's, armor light. Thank you.
What was that?
Armor light.
So what is the
Armor light and Armor light 15.
Rifle 15. Okay.
Oh, it's the name of the company.
Yeah, it's the
Thank
company.
you. Thank you.
Okay.
Armor light.
Armo light.
It's the name of the company.
Thank
Okay.
you.
I'm going to put that up on the website later today so we can all research it, because I admit to saying AR-15 and not having a reason or understanding of what that meant.
Yeah.
Assault rifle made sense to me. And I think that there's probably a generic, sort of stereotype on that. Okay, so I'm getting more questions. Someone in here had to leave their gun in their truck, obviously. And thank you, whoever that is, I appreciate it, because they cannot have it in here. That is correct. What happens if my truck is broken into and my gun is stolen and I don't feel comfortable leaving it at home either?
Yeah, that's you may take it, or you want to go?
Jared's like, I already know the
He's
answer.
ready.
You
He's
should have your gun.
Go ahead.
It's an unfortunate situation. Anybody who decided to carry tonight and had to come here had to leave it in their vehicle. And unfortunately, criminals know that, and they will break into areas where it's a gun-free zone, where they know that weapons are probably stored in vehicles, and that's how they get some of their guns. But yeah, it's an unfortunate situation, because if you leave it at home, you don't have it for the rest of the evening, but you can't bring it in here, so that's the problem.
Yeah. I would definitely agree it's an unfortunate situation, but just like our previous discussion, if you know this is a gun-free zone, then you know that you can't bring your gun in. Just like when you go to the airport, you know that you have to take your pocket knife out and leave it in your car. That's because that's how the current regulations are, and so we know what the current laws are, and it's unfortunate that that would happen, but if you knew you were coming here, then that's something that you have to weigh personally what the best choice for you is.
So we're getting a lot of narrative questions, if that's okay. And this one is gendered this particular way, so I just want to make it clear that I am not biasing the question. A friend had a gun pointed at her on the highway because of her liberal bumper stickers. Do her First Amendment rights to express herself outweigh a man's Second Amendment rights to bear arms?
No, there are laws against that, and that person was rightfully charged. No, she had the right to display those bumper stickers, and he had no right to pull the weapon. I mean, that's just I'm sorry, I'll stop there.
Yeah.
So, yeah, yes, I agree with him. No, that it goes back to that, which is more important thing that we said earlier. Neither one is more important. They're both rights, and that was a crazy situation that shouldn't have happened. And no, bumper stickers do not permit someone to have an aggressive situation happen to them.
Yeah, that's not about bearing the arm. It's about how to use it.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So then another question that comes up is, and I think somebody alluded to this earlier. We all know I'm a college professor here at Missouri State University, where guns are not allowed. Is Andrew in the audience? Did he come, Flory? My favorite guy in the whole wide world. Oh, there's the other Andrew. Oh, hi, Andrew. Okay, not who I met, but that's okay. I love you. I love you guys anyway. So I had a student who would come to my classroom and every day, 2 days a week, every day during the semester, remind me that he did not have his gun on him. And he did it out of respect. He said, I just want you to know I went all the way to my car and put my gun back in my car for you because you don't want it in your classroom. And I said, Andrew, it's not allowed on campus. I don't really understand how this works. But okay, I'm just going to pretend that I did not hear you confess to an illegal activity, right? That joking that we had between us was, of course, between friends who disagree, or between citizens who disagree, I should say. But what if somebody, a private business owner, or worse, somebody who works at a state institution like a university or at a school that is a state institution, does not want guns in their presence? What do we do when somebody's desire to have a gun, and Second Amendment right to have a gun, and somebody's desire to not be around guns? What happens when those two clash? What do we do? That's the hard question, isn't it? I'll give you guys 5 minutes on it.
Yeah. Well,
Jared, I mean, I don't know if you'll need 5, but I'm giving it to you.
I think that, again, that's a very broad question, right? So we have all the time conflicting ideas about things, and what we do is we act accordingly, and we don't be jerks to each other and understand that people have different perspectives. Now, when it comes specifically to campus, we have current laws in place, and if you are a professor who chooses to work at a public institution, you know that the guns cannot come on campus. And so if someone was to bring one on campus, then there are protocols in place of what to do in that situation. But the overarching question, when we clash with people, you clash with people, and we're going to do that in this country and in this state and in this building, and I think it's just important about being civil, going back to the original tenets of tonight's forum.
Jared, are you done writing notes yet? He's
Yes,
writing
I think
notes.
I have it in my mind.
I mean, I could give you prep time if you'd like.
No, respectfully.
Yes.
I can't control how you feel about guns. A feeling is not a constitutional right. But my ability and my right to defend myself is a constitutional right. And so if a person is doing it correctly, you will never know if they have a gun in your presence. I mean, that's the whole CCW is concealed carry weapon. And so you'll never know whether or not they have a gun or not. So respectfully, I can't control your feelings.
Right, you can't make me like guns either.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So, in other words, no one can make me feel secure.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, the First Amendment, I just got this question. The First Amendment has limits, right? We're not allowed to yell certain words in certain places. There's contextual issues with First Amendment rights. There's hate speech limitations. So, the First Amendment of the Constitution of the United States is, in fact, limited. Why is it that we are so resistant to Second Amendment limitations? And Crystal, do you want to start, or do you want to let Jared start? He's dying.
Well, we put restrictions. They're called laws. Murder is a law, and it's illegal, and that is a restriction. You can't just go out and shoot somebody. That's a restriction on the Second Amendment. It is a safety issue, which is why the First Amendment, you can't yell fire in a building, because it is a safety issue. Someone might get trampled. Now, if there's an actual fire, that is not. If there is an actual threat to me, that is not. It is still my right to defend myself, and I'm able to take action. So it's the same thing. I mean, you can't yell fire because it's a safety issue. You can't go around just shooting people at random. It's a safety issue. But you can defend yourself if the need were to arise, and you can also yell fire if there's an actual fire in the building.
Yeah, so I don't know if I can answer why folks are resistant, but he's right in that we do have parameters around both of those. I think it goes back to, as I said earlier, about public safety. And so just like the First Amendment, the Second Amendment, as public safety becomes a concern, we need to be willing to have a conversation. And a conversation does not mean we're removing rights. A conversation simply means that we're evaluating public safety and looking at what we currently have on the books. You know, there was a time when yelling fire wasn't illegal, right? And there was a conversation about it, and then it was weighed that the public safety was at risk, and so this law came into effect. I think the same thing needs to be happening around the Second Amendment and continue to happen around the First Amendment. And we need to be open to that conversation of weighing public safety and looking at what current laws are in place.
Okay, and this is the last question from the audience, and then we'll sort of close up. And this is actually the last question from the audience, so thank you all very much. I have 2 more? 3 more. Interesting. Okay, well, I don't know. I've got 1 more, so we'll run with it, and then we'll see what happens. Most gun deaths are from suicide, according to this question. And this is often overlooked in the gun safety discussion. What can legislators do to reduce these kinds of deaths, suicide? By gun, I assume.
Well, that is a good question. You know, we talked earlier about mental health funding, and in terms of legislators and what we can do around suicide across the board, mental health funding is definitely a priority and something that we should be looking at. And that has gotten bipartisan support as of late, but we need to be increasing access, increasing funding. But I think that it's important to continue to have the conversation, as we did earlier, about stress factors and where the higher risks factors are around suicide. Of course, if someone wants to take their own life, there are multiple ways to do that. And if someone is desperate enough, they will find a way to do that. But higher places of stress, such as college campuses, is of concern. And so I think that we need to be looking at those, partnering with mental health professionals and ask their opinion, find out, again, from the experts of what are those triggers for folks, and do we need to be increasing regulations around not just guns, but, you know, access to opioids, access to all these other things in these high stress situations. So again, I think that when we're having that conversation as legislators, we need to be talking to folks who work in the field, who are experts in the field, and get their perspectives on that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I think she pretty much answered the question. I mean, you know, I think it's important that we get the help needed for individuals that are considering suicide, and make sure that we put a focus on that. I know the colleges in the state of Missouri have put a focus on that the last couple of years, and I think that's an important conversation to have. So I guess I'm just echoing basically what she said. I would agree. I mean, it needs to be a focus that we need to put on it. But like she said, there are multiple ways that an individual can commit suicide. Guns happen to be one of those, but there are other ways that's carried out, unfortunately. And so.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to allow the candidates to answer this next question. Starting with Jared. I think you started last time, or did you? Okay, she did, good. How do citizens keep the government in check without the Second Amendment?
One more time.
How do citizens keep the government in check without the Second Amendment?
I would say by voting. You know, that's another way. By selecting your representatives, going to the ballot box, when we only have 10% of the population voting, I think is a sad, unfortunate situation.
Okay.
I 100% agree with him. I'm going to, again, guess that whoever asked that question is saying that that the Second Amendment is a way that we hold government accountable. If that was the intent of the question, my response is that I don't think majority of people are having a conversation around removing the Second Amendment. I know for me, and I tend to be a little bit more middle ground than some folks, but that would never be my intent. Again, I grew up eating the meat my dad killed. But again, for me, it's a conversation about public safety and looking at the regulations around that and weighing where we're currently at in our culture. I definitely understand the argument of the Second Amendment allows for accountability. If we needed to overthrow the government, we have the ability to do so. I don't think anyone is having that conversation. Well, the majority of people are wanting to have that conversation. But he's 100% right that when it comes to holding us accountable, you do it at the ballot box. You show up to things like this and you ask questions. You show up to Jefferson City and hold our feet to the fire and we say we're going to do something. Make sure that we do. And if we don't, vote us out.
I did that twice. See, I told you it would happen. Representatives, do you have any final thoughts that you want to say to your constituents tonight?
No, again, I appreciate the opportunity. I'm glad that you all took the time to come out and have this discussion with us. I think there are other aspects of this that we need to consider. I think it's important for an individual to be able to exercise their right and to be able to defend themselves when we're talking about the increase in sexual assaults on campus, whether it be from someone that you know, whether it's an intimate partner or not, it's still a sexual assault. I would also, someone shouldn't lose their right just because they cross national onto college campus, onto MSU, and shouldn't lose the right to defend themselves. We should have that right on college campus as well as other locations that we specifically list in statute. I think I've appreciated all of the questions. I try and answer them honestly, and I hope to continue to have the discussion, and hopefully you see where I'm at on the issue, and maybe maybe I brought one or two of you on board, but anyway, thank you.
I of course would like to thank you all for coming. I think we should be doing more of this. I think that as legislators, I've had a couple town halls already. I think that we need to be doing this when it comes to especially controversial conversations. One of the things that I have really tried to do since being in Jefferson City is to find common ground. And I know that's a dirty word anymore in the political world, but there's a lot more that we agree on than we disagree, in my opinion. And there are some fundamental things that folks disagree on that are life-altering for people. And I definitely would never ask someone to waver in their convictions. But when it comes to public policy, public safety, and these things that as legislators we're discussing, we need to be having conversations and be willing to have the conversations. And so I really appreciate you all coming and asking these questions and letting us kind of go back and forth a little bit. And I appreciate really hearing from you because, we may disagree a little bit, but I'm obviously not as hard in convictions as Representative Taylor is. I'm not sponsoring legislation around this, but these types of forums and conversations and you all making your voices heard and asking these questions really is how we get effective policy. And so I really appreciate you coming, and I hope that we can continue to do more things like this.
Well, then we have to ask the citizens, if I did this again, if Be Civil Be Heard sponsored it, would you come back out again to hear more? There was another question being suggested about the number of regulations that there are on guns. We know that this legislation is being proposed December 1st and will be discussed in the next session in January and February. Representative Taylor and Quade, would you be willing to come back and answer their questions?
Yeah, definitely.
Sure.
That was a yes. Let us thank the representatives for their time tonight. Thank you for your civility tonight. Thank you to Missouri State. Again, this has been fantastic. We'll host another one. Be on the lookout. Thank you, everybody.